Okay, happy Monday, everyone. April 25th makes it springtime, unless you use the weather in Minneapolis to determine if it's spring, because it's like 30 degrees, windy, snowy. No, not snowy. I don't think it's snowing yet. I think it's just
Did
wet.
you get one nice day of spring? Because we got one great day. Saturday was like 70s and sunny.
Oh.
And then it dropped 40 degrees.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah, we did. And it was, it was marginally nice. It was half the day or part of the day, and then it was thunderstorms and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, well, I would love to know where you're all coming from on your watching of the live stream and what your weather circumstance is. I'm in Minneapolis. Dan's outside South Bend, in South Bend, Indiana. Jim Eaton, we can see you there. Jim, I think you're in California. So nice to see you. And others are going to pop on. We got a little good news, common good news reports today. Not all of it's really all that good of news, but, it's our theme.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about France and their election. We'll talk about unions and this movement of politicians and other activists in the United States trying to get Amazon workers to unionize. We will talk about Disney and the fact that somehow the Republican governor of Florida decides he wants to fight and punish Disney.
Pick a fight with Disney.
I mean, just harken back to the days when Republicans just said whatever big business wants. And you think, what in the world has happened? Now, I'm not saying that was a good deal, but what has happened since then? How is a Florida governor fighting with Disney and over stuff that, the governor should not have anything to do with? And then a little rant, if there's time, which the rant should probably take, 48, 72 hours for me to finish, on cryptocurrency and NFTs. Because boy, Dan, I got boosted this weekend by watching listening to a podcast and watching a YouTube video on the nonsense that is cryptocurrency and the even bigger nonsense that are NFTs, that is really the thing that's only created so people can use cryptocurrency.
It looks like this was over 2 hours long, so you've got plenty of material for this podcast.
It is called The Line Goes Up. It's a YouTube documentary / rant. One guy's opinion about all this. In my opinion, very well researched. I'm all in. We'll talk about that one in a bit. Cryptocurrency. And then Ukraine, the war that Russia has inflicted upon the Ukrainians and what that's doing to climate. And then this tragic story of a climate activist burning himself to death outside of the United States Supreme Court. So I think that's a tragic move. But, I guess all of our opinions don't matter. So if you've got some news story you want us to reflect on at any time, you can send it to podcast@votecommongood.com, and we would love to know your thoughts. And or put it in a chat or send it to us in all the ways and all the social places. And hey, if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that like button or subscribe button and hit that.
Yes,
I've been watching so many YouTube videos on so many things, and God, I just, I mean, I guess overall, it just kind of reminds you, it's Bob Barker from The Price is Right reminding you to have your pets spayed or neutered. It's us reminding you to make common good your voting criteria. But, be sure to hit that subscribe button.
I feel like at this point in the game, if you're on YouTube, you know that the person making the video wants you to hit the subscribe button, and it's right there. I don't know
if
the reminders are all that effective, but
yeah,
but we try anyways, You
think there's just enough new people and they know? I mean, these are people, by the way, who have, subscription numbers of subscribers that are 100,000 to 1.2 million. They know their business. There are so many people making a living off of YouTube channels. And I've watched some I watch videos about how to make YouTube videos, like a lot of things about cameras and lights and LUTs, color palettes and things I don't really know anything about. And the level to which people put into their YouTube videos, the quality of them are unbelievably spectacular and obsessive, just obsessive. You wouldn't think someone could go on a rant other than maybe this podcast about the difference between 1080 and 4K, but I'll tell you, that'll drag you down a rabbit hole of to the point that you just think, why would I even put out a live stream or do a video if it's not in 4K? I don't know what I'm doing.
Why
I'm
bother? Yeah.
wasting my life. It's amazing. Hey, on the international political note, France seemingly dodged a bullet, if you can imagine. They, I've added a new camera too, just for a little side
That was
eyes.
a nice move.
Yeah,
Got a little side camera that you can wink at.
And then I hit the wrong button if I'm not careful. Apparently, this victory was, for some people's minds, a pleasant surprise that the current president of France, who's been in office for just about 5 years now, Macron, won with 58% of the vote over this Marine Le Pen, who is part of the far right group in France. But the way they do it in France, unlike the way we do it here, is they have multiple runoffs or multiple elections. So they had one that had a number of parties involved, from the moderates that Macron is to the very extremists that Le Pen is, and then other people like the more progressives that we would call them here,
and even further right from Le Pen. There's like the ultra nationalists even further to the right.
And so all those people are in like a runoff, and if no one gets 50%, then the top two move on, and that was the election that happened on Sunday between Macron and Le Pen. But it doesn't bode well in France that the current president didn't get 50% in the first round, and then only got it by begrudgingly bringing over the people who were too liberal and couldn't first blush vote for Macron, and then later couldn't vote for Le Pen, and some of the really hard right people that didn't think she went far enough. So what was the point? All that to say, this right-wing movement internationally is still alive and well, man. Yeah. It is really something else. It started 4 or 5 years ago, this what I would refer to as sort of a pandemic of right-wing extremism started to catch the popular imagination across Europe, in the UK, clearly in parts of Asia, and in the United States. This brought us Donald Trump and all that we're dealing with here in this country. And even though Macron won and everybody's happy, 58% of the vote in this head-to-head runoff, the fact that Le Pen made such a strong showing 2 elections in a row, these people are just building. They are just preparing. And to think that
in her concession speech, she talked about it as a victory. She said, this is hopeful. We're on the right track.
I'm telling you, you get 41% or 42% of head-to-head runoff voters in France voting for a party, this extremist right-wing party, that wants to pull out of NATO, where she actually is taking loans from Putin himself to fund her campaign and has loans to pay back to Vladimir Putin. And you still, in the middle of Russia attacking Ukraine and using NATO relationships in order to protect Ukraine, and still in the middle of that, 42% of the people who voted in France said, let's give her a try. Mm-hmm. I mean, look, if there are times when you can say, well, yeah, people weren't really taking it seriously, or they just wanted to change, like people said about Trump in the United States, all this kind of stuff, that the consequences weren't high. It was a free vote. That can explain a lot. Maybe that explained, when 2016 or 2017, when that election first went on. But I don't think it can explain now, when the very crux of how is the international order going to stabilize the world, and someone says, I think we should pull out of the international order of NATO, and she gets 42% in France.
Yeah. And this is all part of a coordinated effort to mainstream some of these extremist ideas and to make them more palatable. Le Pen, it seems, has been really shrewd in the way she has sort of sanitized their far right message, and she did some things within her own party. They changed the name. She had to kick out her own dad, who was like a little too extreme. It's like, Dad, you sit this one out. But that's what worries me, is that these ideas of isolationist and Islamophobia are creeping into the mainstream in ways that we haven't seen. Well, at least in my lifetime, I haven't seen this level of it. Saying the quiet things out loud.
That's right. And that it's the selling point. It's the feature and not the flaw. Like there's always, these folks have always been around kind of conservatism in Europe and in the United States, for sure. Mm-hmm. But people were like, look, that's not the, like you say, that's not the stuff we talk about. It was, we'd have to deal with that because you just kind of get those folks. Now it's like, oh, we're all those folks.
Yeah.
And the thing that's dangerous about it, and look, you can say people say these same things about people that hold political views, like I and you hold, but I just don't think it's at all equal, because when you put authoritarian impulses with the narrative, which often comes out of the right, that only true supporters of France or only true supporters of the United States are the ones who are voting for our candidate. Everyone else hates our country.
Yep.
Wants to see its demise. And look, we all have to be careful of this. I feel sometimes like, man, do these Republicans even care about democracy? That's a very deep wondering that I have, but it should not ever reach an allegation, right? It shouldn't reach the point of saying you don't care about America, because once you have your fellow citizen in the United States or France or anywhere else as the enemy, then you're into a whole other narrative. Now, they can always be the opposition. They can always be the other view. They can always be the contrary. They can always be, your general competition.
Yeah.
But they shouldn't be the thing you're trying to protect yourself against.
Right.
When that happens, and it's partnered with authoritarianism, as is happening in the United States, and as Le Pen was presenting her anti-immigrant kind of approaches, all the same things are happening in the United States. That's the time when you're really in trouble. So while we should all breathe a sigh of relief, and now for 5 more years, we're not going to be in threat of France leaving the international order. There's 5 more years where they're just going to keep building an argument that internationalism and the kind of more globalist approach is the failed approach, and that is just under threat all over the world.
And this article points out that even without being in power, these extremist political parties are getting their way in their countries. They're forcing issues onto the table, and like you see in the U.S., they're going local. They're going to school boards. They're going to local elections.
Right.
So it is scary that they're close to the presidency in ways we haven't seen, but it's more scary that they're making decisions at the local level and actually causing some real trouble there.
Totally. And political movements are almost always better and more powerful when they're not in power. Because you don't have to deal with the day-to-day implications of the circumstances of life.
Yeah, you don't actually have to fix things. You don't actually have to make them work.
No, you can make an argument that, hey, if we were in charge, it wouldn't be like this. That's a much better place to. Oppositional political movements are always cleaner and always more attractive, and are presented still in their packaging with all the allure of what could be. So they have a great advantage once they get in charge. I mean, our former president, after his second impeachment and then failed presidential election, you start to look at someone like that and think, well, he isn't very good at it. He's terrible. Even if you want to make the argument, I really loved his policies, which I just can't understand how someone would, but it's a viable approach, right? I like his policies, but he's terrible at it. They were terrible at implementing the policies of the Trump administration because it's really hard. And especially when you have the attitudes that these people have on the right wing of the political spectrum around the world, it's just, Anyway.
Yeah. And what's really
Lots.
troubling, I don't know if you caught any of the hearing with Marjorie Taylor Greene, where she is at risk of being forbidden from running for re-election because of her role in the January 6th insurrection.
Yeah.
But they were really grilling her about the language she was using, because they're like, do you remember saying that Nancy Pelosi is an enemy of the state and needs to be killed? She's like, I don't recall. I don't think I ever said that. Then they'd pull up a video or a tweet of hers where she would say this exact same thing, and she'd have to backpedal and, it's out of context. But she's saying these things out loud, that this person in power is an enemy of the state, and you know what we do to enemies is treason, gets the death penalty. She was saying these things in the public sphere on Twitter, like.
Was this when she was a congresswoman, or was this?
I think a lot of this was before she was elected, but
which is
some
going to
of
be
it
her
wasn't,
excuse, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be her rationale. Well, that's just what you say in the heat of a campaign or something. No, it's not what you say in the heat of a campaign. You don't implicitly or explicitly threaten the lives of other politicians because they're an enemy of the state.
Yeah.
And look, I know a lot of super progressives and liberals, and include everybody political crowd, that actually feel that way about so many other people on the other side of the political spectrum, that they just truly cannot understand and wonder if they are an enemy of democracy. It's I don't know how we get out of it internationally or in the United States, but I don't know if people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert and Trump and Matt Gaetz and Jim from Ohio. What's his name? How have I forgotten? The congressman from Ohio. Jim Jordan. The Jim Jordan. I don't know if the Jim Jordans and these people, I don't know if they are ultimately going to help the cause the way that 1950s and 60s McCarthyism fell under the weight of Congress opening up communist, investigations on people. Maybe that's what will happen. Maybe ultimately people will say, hey, this has just gone too far, and seeing these people out in the open, like that Unite the Right rally was just over the top for so many people, seeing men walking through parks in Virginia with torches singing "The Jews will not replace us." Like, that just felt so far over the edge, even though the former failed, twice impeached president said, there were good people on both sides of that argument. Yeah. Most other people said that's just something we're not going to tolerate, and really turned against him. Maybe that's what will happen with this. But as we were saying in France, it's not what's happened in France. It's really not what's happened in the United States. The Republican Party has paid zero cost for coddling these people and letting them be in power.
Yeah.
None at all.
And I wonder if they've gone a little too far with picking a fight with Disney. We got Ron DeSantis has put his stake in the ground, said, I am going to go toe-to-toe with Disney, one of the largest employers in his state, and arguably the largest attraction for people outside his state to come visit his state. Like, I'm going to make it harder for this massive company to function in my state.
One of the crowning jewels of Florida.
And it seems to be just unnecessarily hateful. Like, he's mad that they stood up against this anti-trans legislation and just put out a tepid statement about it. Like,
totally. Like what this all roots back to is that the Florida legislature, at the prompting of Governor DeSantis and signed by DeSantis, is this bill that wants to limit what school teachers can say and talk about, and they don't want them talking about non-heterosexual relationships, marriage relationships in school. They think school-age kids shouldn't be talking about that at school. They should be talking about it somewhere else, that schools should be free zones and not have to deal with these kinds of issues. The same argument that they make about CRT and other things. And, there was a time when people were making these arguments about like, hey, let's not have our kids watching Harry Potter movies or reading those books in school because that feels like it violates my religious convictions. But now they're literally saying, don't talk about legal marriage as it exists in the United States.
Right. Or don't even talk about your own identity as a gay or trans person. Like you can't mention you have a partner. You can't mention anything about yourself as it pertains to what makes you you.
Yeah, it's just something like the no talk rules, the gag rules that they're putting in about this stuff is really something. Right. Now, there are moments where I think, boy, if they would do this around guns, if they would say, hey, in school, you can't talk about concealed carry, you can't talk about going to the gun range, you can't talk about anything that has to do with violence or war, you can't play those video games, and that seems slightly appealing to me. So I can see how someone might think, I don't want my kids dealing with this. Why is the school putting this in my children's heads? Well, it's because I don't get my way around guns because it's legal to go to a gun range. You don't get to have your way on this issue, even if you disagree with the fact that people are marrying someone of the same sex or that someone wants to identify as a gender different than the one that they've been generally accused of on their birth certificate and other places, or because of chromosomal reports. And they say, I don't want to be identified that way. You can't talk about that in schools. And Disney has said, we just think this goes too far. We think it's intended to silence, and we think the silence is intended to condemn, and we're unwilling to condemn gay families, and we're unwilling to condemn people who want to be seen by a gender different than what other people want to assign to them. That seems totally reasonable that Disney would say, we don't agree with this legislation. Then what they did
also seems like free speech, right? Like...
Yeah, as then said, well, if you don't go along with the bills that we've passed as a legislature and signed by the governor, then we're going to give public benefit restrictions to you. You've had a public benefit as an operating force in Florida to operate your own essential tax district and essential, operational district in the land that's owned by the Disney Corporation. Mm-hmm. So if they wanted to build a building, they didn't have to go through normal building codes. They could operate their own under supervision of the state. But they got to skip some of the rest of the parts of Florida. And by the way, Disney's not the only one that has this. Florida has this all over the place. They have these special jurisdictions. There's a big housing development there, community, almost little city called the Villages. They also have their own operating system and pay taxes at a different level.
The funny part is
Disney for this and raise taxes on Disney, where now Disney's going to have to pay $168 million more in taxes. And how a Republican says what we need to do is tax our corporations more. Just tells you we're totally outside the old game. Yeah. We're no longer playing soccer. We're no longer playing cricket. We're no longer playing football or basketball. We're now in a game that no one even knows what the point is. Now someone's just chucking balls in the gymnasium after school. You know what I mean? Remember that when you were a kid and you'd go in the gym and there wasn't like a game going on. There were just the pieces of a game going on. Well, that's what they're doing. They're just randomly doing stuff now as Republicans that seemingly makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I really struggle to figure out what the Republican Party stands for these days.
Yeah.
Because on the surface, it looks like they have these pet issues. They really don't want trans people to exist in their society. They don't want to see them. They don't want to talk about them. They don't want their kids to know that that's an option. And all the other stuff that Republicans used to be all about, doesn't seem to matter. It's just about hating the right people.
I mean, I've heard so many Republicans, especially Florida Republicans, say things like, 20 years ago, we never thought the governor would tell school districts what their curriculum could be. How did we
Yeah.
get to this? People ran for office on that. Like up in Tallahassee, Florida, where the state capital is, you don't know what we all know. Leave teachers alone. Let local school boards, local governance.
Yeah.
Now Republicans are like, no, we want to centralize that. No, now we want to tax corporations for not agreeing with the government, which seems bonkers, right? They used to argue things like, hey, if the federal law is that you have to provide health care, well, corporations don't have to do that because their owners are religious people who disagree with birth control. So they get a pass on that. That's the Hobby Lobby case.
Hobby Lobby. Yep.
So these were the arguments that they're still making. And that's what I mean. Like there's not, to borrow the metaphor of a game, we don't even know what game we're in anymore. We don't know what the point is because these people are just taking the balls and the cones and the fields, and they're just doing other things with them now. So
And
now
they'll
all of a sudden, it's
they'll
just
do
crazy, Bill.
anything. They'll shoot themselves in the foot to own the libs, like the stuff they're doing at the border in Texas. Like, let's stop all imports of our vegetables and fruit.
Yes.
Let it rot in the trucks just to prove some sort of point and make you look tough on the border. Like, it's hurting you. You don't get to eat the food that was on those trucks now. Like,
it's a kind of punishment, showmanship punishment that seems bizarre.
yeah.
Right. But it actually does fit a kind of worldview. It fits a worldview that says, we want to stand against something by harming people, which is very confusing. Right now, you might say, well, we're only going to harm the right people. Only the perpetrators are going to be harmed. But this idea that we're going to stand for what's right by being sure that someone's going to pay a high cost. Now, look, we're going to talk in a little bit about this climate activist burning himself to death outside the Supreme Court. That sits in the same genre, actually, to me. The idea that someone's going to burn themselves to death, which a man did apparently over the weekend, outside the Supreme Court to make a point to try to raise attention about this. Now, he's self-harming as opposed to harming someone else, but it kind of fits in the same genre of we can do great harm in order to make a point. And I think that approach is really broken. And that's the approach that has to be done away with. I just feel like my religious teachings, I think, teach this, and just regular old human experience teaches you that this is no good. Punishing a group of people because they disagree with you or because they're not acting the way you want, or punishing yourself in order to make an example of yourself, I just believe it doesn't work. I know other people argue that it does. And look, I am an activist and I do all kind of activist things. So I'm now having an activist upon activist argument about strategy and which activism is the best. But this kind of thing, like harm Disney or harm the vegetables or the workers, or do some sort of, you're going to find out if you move against us, or you utilize political opinion different. This is what Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, did by shutting down a bridge so that people got dumped into this small little community because the mayor in that community wouldn't support the governor's agenda. Yeah. So they shut down a bridge, so it caused a traffic jam. That kind of thing. It just goes on and on. And I'm sure there are people who will give all kinds of examples that aren't just a liberal activist, committing an act of suicide in order to make a point that's more mundane and average like this. But whoever does it, it's not about, only the conservatives are doing it and others aren't. I'm guessing people of other political persuasions do it as well.
The difference, though, seems to be
to make this their point.
Yeah. The difference seems to be, though, for someone to raise a protest who isn't in power, that's one thing. For the governor of a state to use the power of the state against a corporation for something that they said, that's actually a literal infringement of the First Amendment right to free speech. Like, it's not saying someone can't say something on Twitter. Like, that's not a free speech debate because the government isn't involved with silencing someone. Yeah, but when the government says
cancel culture
Yeah.
at the highest of levels.
Government-sponsored cancel culture. Agree with us, or we will tax you more.
Hey, one of the news item that came out today, I saw this one in a tweet, and it's got my goat. All right, so this is a tweet by Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders writes in the tweet, "The workers at Amazon Labor," which is a Twitter handle, "are taking on the most powerful company in America and one of the wealthiest men on the planet, and AOC and I are on Staten Island to stand with them." And it's an ad for a video that shows them standing there with these workers. Now, look, I am all for unions. Unions are fantastic. More people should be in them. It's a great way for workers to organize that gives them equal power to employers and corporations. But as someone who supports unions, unions are not opposite companies. They're not the opponent to companies. Unions are not taking on companies. They're not fighting against companies. Unions are a way to strengthen companies. So when this kind of language is used, unions are organizing against the company that the employees work for. That's just a wrong-headed way to describe unions. You know, we used to have an argument in this country that unions make companies stronger. You should all support the union because it's going to save our company, because we're going to all be better workers and productivity is going to go up and profits are going to rise because unions make everything better. Instead, now somehow it's like union workers are the opposition to the company they work for. And this kind of fight against your very employer by joining a union, as opposed to saying unions are going to make workers better, workers are going to make the company better, and all of this is going to benefit all of us. If that's not the argument of unions, if the argument of unions is we want to see this company collapse, we want to see this company punished, we want to see this company's owners not make as much money, we want to redistribute what you have and give it to us. If that's the argument, that's not going to fly in America. And one of the reasons I think we have trouble getting more union participation is because this kind of argument is what's out there all the time. I think it's wrong-headed. It's not the point of unions. Anyone who's in a union knows that they want their union to be in cooperation with the companies they work for, so that when you hire union labor, you know that's making your company better, and that owners of companies and stockholders and anybody who's connected to a company feels like, hey, we're really glad the union is here. And if unions are doing something else, if unions exist to bust the company, there's a problem. If companies exist to bust the union, there's a problem. We have rules against that. You can't be a union buster as a company. Well,
but that seems to be the point of this particular instance, right? Because Amazon doesn't want to allow unions. Starbucks doesn't want to allow unions. They're actually spending millions of dollars to pre-bust the union, to prevent it from coming into existence, because they view it as some sort of threat.
Look, if companies want to say, we think unions are going to make, if we think that a unionized labor force is going to make this company less good, they should make that argument. If unions are making the argument that being a union is going to make the company less good, then they're making the company's argument. Yeah. What I'm suggesting is the companies who are saying unions make us worse are wrong, and union organizers or union advocates who are saying organizing as a union means that you're taking on the most powerful company in America. What do you mean you're taking it on? You're working against it? Now, if what it means is your voice is now going to be seen as an equal, okay, but I don't think that's what this is all about. I think this kind of language is most powerful company, wealthiest person in the world. If we unionize, you won't be that. That's what that's the implication of this language. And it's not just the wording of one particular tweet. It's an entire attitude. So this is why my argument is when a union organizer uses the same language as the company, that this union's going to make the company worse, you've lost the argument. Because fundamentally in this country, people want companies, especially ones that they know and recognize and understand and have integrated into their life as a provider. They want those companies to succeed. They want them to do good. They want them to do right, all of that stuff. What they don't want is this idea that if unions give workers what workers are due, then that's going to somehow harm the company. It's so wrongheaded. I can't.
Yeah.
Really
There's
like
a lot to it
today, by the way. Go on. You say there's a lot to it. I mean, maybe there's another argument that I'm missing here.
I think
maybe I'm not getting it.
Well, I think there's, sentiments across the spectrum, but the right to exist as a union seems like a first step. Like you don't get to have the debate about anything else if you're not allowed to organize. And so that's what it seems to be.
People who decide if there's going to be a union are the workers. That's how the unions work. Now, you can say companies who don't want there to be unions put undue pressure on the people who are going to vote to not organize as a union.
Or they retaliate, as we've seen with Amazon and
they do
Starbucks.
They're people don't really have a free chance. That's an argument worth investigating. But it's not like the company has to go along with there being a union. The way union laws work and the way union organizing work is if
a percentage of the workers,
yeah, that's it. That's how it goes. So it's not as if union workers have to look to anyone else. I think the reason people don't join unions is because people are convinced that if you're in a union, you're going to get a worse deal as a worker. It's going to damage the company and it's going to put everything at risk. So let's stay with what we've got instead of putting the company at risk. And what we need to do is be showing the truth that unions make companies stronger. And if they don't make companies stronger, then you got to fix the union agreements so that they do. Because the point of workers should not be to damage the company. Of course, nobody wants that. And the point of a company should not be to exploit its workers. And they shouldn't be doing that. So both of these need to come together. And the idea, but what's embedded deeply in this is the idea that if a company is successful, if an owner is successful, if a wealthy person is successful, the only way that happened was someone got cheated. That sits in the background of a whole lot of people's imagination in this country, that it's not as if people think, no, you know what, we all do better when we all do better, which is the political philosophy that I find myself in. But when it comes to businesses or something, people think, no. If you're doing better, that's because I'm not doing better. So if you're doing well, I'm not doing well. Now, if you investigate a company or you look at where money is going, like why does the owner have bajillions of dollars and workers can't even afford to, eat at the restaurants that they work at? That's a real problem. And unions should address that problem because that's a bad company. Make the company better.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be what they're getting at with Amazon. Like Jeff Bezos is the second or third richest person on the planet because of the exploitive practices of his company and the conditions that, I think the question comes down to, for me, how do you prevent these massive corporations from taking advantage of their workers? There's a power unions. Yeah, there's a power imbalance.
And then when someone says, yeah, but if you form a union, it's going to ruin the company. You say, no, it's not. It's going to make the company better. You know what's going to make Jeff Bezos more money? You know what's
happy
going to make
workers that are well taken care of. Yeah.
A well-run company. And what's included in a well-run company? So my argument is not don't have unions because unions are the problem. And my argument is not unions hurt businesses. That's the fallacy. Unions make things better. Like every time as a union supporter, unions come up, someone should say, because you know what unions do? They make things better for the workers, for the environment, and for the company.
Mm-hmm.
And when someone says, we can't afford a union, unions make things better. Did you know unions make things better? Like just say it over and over and over. Instead, what we hear is the workers who are organizing are taking on the most powerful company in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then you now think workers' unions are in opposition to companies. And all I'm saying is that in the last 40 years, that's been the pitch, and it has not worked. The reason it hasn't worked is because union voters, people voting to join a union, are saying no. What's the rationale for saying no? It's going to cost me too much money to be in the union. The union's not going to give me the benefits that I can't already get from the company, and it's going to hurt the company. That's why people say no. Ask them when they vote. That's what they'll tell you. Mm-hmm. And when they tell you, believe them. So remove this major obstacle. Look, if unions are too expensive and unions are just serving their own needs and their own purposes, okay, then don't be in a union. Fix that. It's not what's going on the great majority of the time. Anybody who's in a union is normally quite thrilled that they're in a union, and recognize that it makes things better. The teachers' unions, the public teachers' unions, they make our schools better. Workers' unions make our companies better. But what's happened is we now have a world in which you can't say that if you're making a company better, it's a good thing. And that's just bonkers. That's just, why do we want to live in a world where that's the case? Why don't we want to live in a world where the argument's being made that things are being made better by this kind of organizing?
Yeah.
My union rants. We should get a union person on here and let I'll give them this little shtick and see if they agree with me, because
let's get Bernie
every union
on.
organizer I've ever known has said, yeah, no, we want the company to see the value of this union, and we want the workers to see the value of the union. We want the stockholders to see the value of the union.
Well, and the workers only continue to get paid if the company succeeds. So, like, unions want the company to succeed.
That's what they should want. And if they don't want that, look, if the hotel workers unions don't want to see the hotel industry do well, we've got a problem. If a trucking union doesn't want to see trucking companies do well, what's the point of all this? If really, truly what we have is this dystopian fight against someone who owns versus someone who works, if that's just unsolvable and it is a grapes of wrath fight between, then then civil war has already visited us, right? And you know what we've decided in this country when that's been the contrast that people are given? I'm going to go with the company. You know how we know that? Union membership is the lowest level it has been since the 1920s. So the argument is people are saying no to unions. The answer, the critique should not be unions don't work. The critique should be people are saying no to them. Why are they saying no to them? Why are they choosing to believe their managers or the middle managers or the flyer that gets handed out, or why is this all hanging on people they've added a stop sign outside of the factory so that people see a message for 10 seconds longer? Like the explanations we're giving for why workers are not voting for unions does not explain it. What does explain it is people don't want them. And why don't they want them? Because they think wrongly, workers think wrongly that unions are not going to help them and are not going to make the company better and aren't going to give them anything they don't already have. That's the thing we have to solve, and not believe 10 more seconds on this rant and then you can and not believe that these workers don't know what's good for them. They're just being bamboozled. They're just being lied to. If they really knew, like if the blinds were not pulled over their eyes, then they would. No. They're looking at it squarely, vote after vote after vote, and too often saying no. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the big reasons is because they're like, hey, I like working for this company. I don't want to see the company I don't want to see the company harmed. Well, why do they think having a union is going to harm the company? Why aren't we making the better argument?
Yeah. Well, I wonder
like you had a retort.
if workers for a while now just haven't had options, right? But we're at a moment where unemployment is really low. Workers have more options. Through this pandemic, we've decided maybe I don't need to live like I was living before. Maybe I don't have to settle for the conditions I had before. And so unions are having a moment. Like, people are forming unions in Starbucks and Amazon and a bunch of different places and deciding for a number of reasons that maybe I don't have to settle for this and we can have something better, and a union is the way to go.
Okay, I think you're right. I think that's what's happening. The question that lingers in my head is, why were we in a time where people said unions don't help?
Yeah.
Why did they go away? I think if you polled your average person, I was probably done a poll like this and asked the question, do you believe that unions help or hurt companies? I mean, how would you have answered that question? I just think most people would say, I think they hurt companies, but they help workers. I think it's who do they hurt and who do they help? That's the contrast. I don't think people are saying, I think it helps both workers and helps the company. And we're never going to get to the place where workers have the levels of support that they have if they come to believe and continue to believe en masse across the United States. I mean, I know people who are forced to be in unions and still think unions are harming the companies they work for. It's bonker. Like, people who are getting the benefits of it and see how it works out and know that their union representatives can work well with management and everything's going fine. They're still like, yeah, but our union is really screwing and sticking it to the man. Now, some people like that and they feel good about that. And some people are like, if I could not be in this union, I would do it. I'd be a union buster, but I can't be a fill in the blank, plumber, carpenter, worker, restaurant. I can't do it in this town without being in the union, but I still think it hurts the companies. This is the mythology that many people who don't want there to be unions, especially people that want to exploit workers, this is the logic they've used and they've won.
Yeah.
They've put that idea in people's heads to the point that now union organizers are using that. They've given up on that argument. You've given up on the argument if unions are beneficial to companies or not.
Comes down to messaging. Who's telling a better story?
It does. And it comes down to belief fundamentally. I think, okay, just keep me going. I think the anti-union people and the union people are messaging exactly the way they want to. Like, they're right on message. I think their content is misguided. Unions should be a union and good. I believe good union organizers do this. I shouldn't be saying they should do it. I think this is exactly what they do. They say, let's form a union, strengthen our union. It's going to make things better for everyone. But again, because we live in a world in which if part of the everyone includes owners, that there's a political and philosophical movement in the country that wants to say, if you're helping those people, it can't be good. Somehow you're helping the enemy.
It's a binary. Yeah. Either you're with us or you're against us.
Yeah. And this binary thing and two Americas thing. And I'm not saying the realities are equal for everyone. Not at all. But I am saying that shouldn't be the point. We shouldn't be continually when we find that people live in different experiences in different parts of the United States, we should seek to correct that, as opposed to making that a permanent feature of what we're getting at in the United States.
Yeah. Well, speaking of binaries where there's a clear bad guy and a clear good guy, Ukraine is still just being devastated. Mariupol especially is 3 weeks under siege. The news coming out of the city is just brutal and disturbing. I don't have much to say about this other than this is still going on, and it's easy for us in America to kind of lose interest after something goes on for longer than a week. But it's still going on.
It is. And I've been struggling with even knowing how to think about it, because there's part of me that just thinks, what am I going to do about knowing about this? Like, there's the human empathy side, right? So, which I get. It is really important. Like, human beings should be connected to other human beings on the planet to know that great levels of suffering are happening. Yes. But if you watch any level of like political cable news coverage and a little bit of public radio, you would think that the implications of the military action of Russia in Ukraine has great, serious consequences for all of us in the United States, and that our opinion about it has something to do with the ultimate outcome. Now, again, however energy works and goodness and thought and prayer and 10,000 people thinking a good thing at the same time changes. Okay, all of that, just assuming that's case in point, that happens or doesn't happen, whatever. What do we do with this information? Like the level to which I know about East versus West Ukraine, that I know about the town of Mariupol, that I know about a factory that has some people living in it, and every morning I'm reminded about how things are going in the factory. I'm not entirely sure what to do with this.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's just voyeuristic or it's just drama manipulation, but something doesn't feel quite right about the level of coverage we have going on in this. Look, if the United States were involved and there was public and political implications in it, and maybe someone is making the argument that at some point U.S. support of these efforts are going to have to continue for us to continue to support Ukrainians. Okay, maybe that's part of it. But it just feels like this is one of those issues for which there's a great level of demand and very little equal response to it.
Sure.
And when those things get out of whack, I don't want to be a quitter on worrying about Ukraine, but at the same time, I'm like, what's all this worry doing? It's got my wife thinking, because I was talking about this with her the other day, and she said, well, it could lead to, the next world war. This is almost by definition not a world war. In other words, there's two countries involved on a very specific war having to do with joined boundaries. It is a regional skirmish. Not to say it's not horrible and terrible, but on the scope of what's a regional military skirmish and what is a declared war of multiple countries around the world, this is not that, seems to me.
Yeah,
So
hopefully it stays in that category. But yeah, this whole thing about there's too much to care about in the world is something I think about a lot, because I'm a person that cares about things. I care about when people are hurting. But there's only there's a limit, there's a capacity, and you can't care about everything. Syria is still a mess. We cared about that for a little bit. There was the white helmets. I don't know if you remember this group of people called the white helmets that were out rescuing people and caring for people. But after years pass of the same situation, we just grow immune to it. And I worry that it's going to happen here, and we'll eventually tire of hearing about atrocities and hearing about the ongoing battles and hardships, and it'll just sink into the background like so many other, like Yemen, like a lot of places in the world.
Yeah, I was just Googling wars that are currently, countries that are currently at war. It's Afghanistan, Ethiopia, Yemen. Like, there are wars happening around the world, and we should care for sure. Human beings should care whenever war is breaking out. But at some point, this thing reaches a level of, well, honestly, what am I going to do about it now? Like, what is,
Yeah, there's a
What
certain
are
point,
my
like a
options?
public outcry has caused our government to offer up more aid and more
Yeah,
specific aid, and that seems
true.
like something that only comes from a critical mass of people being loud about an issue. But
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Right. That could be it. Or did it work the other way? Did it work the other way where when our government responded and said, we're going to send military aid, we're going to be on their side, that people started to say, hey, this matters. This is really important. Had the U.S. said, look, this is not something we're going to concern ourselves with. It's a regional squabble. We're going to stay out of it. Yeah, sure, we don't want a democracy to fall, but really that's up to Ukraine to figure out,
I think,
like we do in other world.
yeah,
Do
I
you
think it
really think?
might have gone that direction had not their president been such a keen like
Little champ.
player of yeah, he used social media and he used like narrative to his advantage. He really cast the Ukrainian people in this heroic light that I really think galvanized the global community around them. And
Well, as always, you're probably right. But imagine for a minute that we live in a dystopian world where the failed president, former president, was the president of the United States, or that all these things had happened a year earlier in the calendar.
mm-hmm.
And the president was Trump, and he was saying things like, "Oh, Putin, it's kind of the things they do. It's kind of smart, and yeah, Ukraine, they just need to negotiate, and that's sort of how this goes." And
This is just the art of the deal.
We'll throw some. Do you think people in the United States would be like, "We're gonna come out and Vladimir Zelensky is our guy"? I don't think so. I think it's a combination of the fact that for a long time, Biden was out there and the Biden administration were out there saying, Putin is going to attack. We're going to stand with Ukraine. We're going to stand with NATO. We're going to make a big deal out of this. We're going to send over our Secretary of Defense. We're going to send over our ambassadors. We're going to spend money. We're going to get Congress. And then people started to come along because early on when people thought, hey, this thing is going to fail. These guys are not going to, it's going to be over in a week. People are like, hey, it's really sad for Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you've got this underdog story, like you say,
Right.
and all this stuff starts coming out. So all that to say, I don't think it was just a populist movement in the United States that's caused, I think it's been a joint effort between the United States government and people, and we're all feeling this thing. But now I think we're reaching the point where it's a little bit like, okay, this is going to be a long, drawn-out war, and really, our military aid needs to keep going. And now, once again, the United States is going to have to perpetuate a war in another part of the world because there's an outcome that we want. Now, in this case, this is an outcome that's good to want, as opposed to other outcomes that the United States government may have wanted. But look at what we're doing.
Yeah,
we're advocating a war because there's an outcome that we want to happen in another country. Mm-hmm. So yeah, but probably isn't the time to do, anti-interventionist and anti-war conversations because it's going to fall on appropriately full ears at this point. Well,
but
then now we've gone so long in these important issues, I can't even rant about cryptocurrency and what a nightmare it is.
That deserves its own
cryptocurrency,
its own, solid hour, really.
Oh yeah, maybe 2 hours and 18 minutes of a YouTube video. All right, let's look and see what some of the people wrote. Is that good, or do you have a couple other things to?
Well, I don't know if we wanted to make the connection from the war in Ukraine to now we're turning more to coal. We're using more coal. It's kind of a resurgence because we're not getting as much gas from Russia, and then that's also meaning that Biden is under pressure to ease the pain at the pump. And so he's gone back on this promise to not allow more drilling on public lands. He said, let's go ahead and open that up for leasing again. And all of this is just fueling the ongoing climate crisis, as we mentioned earlier. And there's a recent climate report that's more dire than the last. And you hear these reports come out, and I don't know how you feel, but it feels like a sense of hopelessness there as well. It's like, well, what do? I recycle. That's not gonna,
You have
offset.
to reduce and reuse
Yeah.
as well as recycle.
I haven't
Yeah.
been reusing as much as I should. That's probably why we're in the position we are.
See, that's it. It's you. It's your fault. You didn't reuse that plastic container. You just put it in the recycle. You did just. I mean, when I was in high school in 1983, they put up we redesigned our cafeteria. There was a little cafeteria group and redesigned it, and we put up these neon. Somebody ordered neon phrases, and so one was up there. I can't remember. There's some like catchy phrase from the 80s that was there, and then a big bold letters of reduce, reuse, recycle. It had already reached a mantra level in 1983. And, I'm a 55-year-old man who, when I was a junior in high school, we were hanging that on the walls. And the fact that it's still something we're trying to argue for, it's not exactly catching on to the human spirit at a sufficient level. And yeah, when you look at what's gone on here with, Biden opening up drilling and reversing on ethanol, which, by the way, putting corn-based fuel 15% or higher in your gas is a really bad thing for the environment, because taking corn and not using it to feed human beings and rather burning it in your vehicle is a write-off and a subsidy for corn farmers. But other than that, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
One SUV full, so say 40 gallons of ethanol 85, so 85% fuel, 15% ethanol. It takes the equivalent of a person's year of consumption of corn for that one tank of gas. It is so profoundly inefficient. They only went to it, and our former governor of Minnesota was a big proponent of this, when corn was flooding the market in the 90s, and corn subsidies or corn values were dropping so much because there was too much corn on the planet. It's not the case anymore. But Biden went back on that one too, because he wanted to go to certain parts of the country and say, we're responding to this fuel crisis.
Yeah.
Now, look, I get their argument that we're not changing our long-term goal. This is a temporary issue. It would be like someone saying we need to get out of debt, right? So we're going to curb our spending. We're not going to spend stuff that we used to buy. We're not going to do additions to our house or something because we're going to pay off our debt. It's a great plan. We're going to do this for the next 20 years, 5 years, 10 years. We're going to get out of debt. And then their washing machine breaks. And they're like, we really need to spend $700 on a new washing machine. No, we're going to get out of debt. Well, a one-time expenditure on a $700 washing machine doesn't mean you've broken the plan. It might mean a short setback. It might mean that, okay, now we have $700 more that aren't going to pay off our debt, but we're still going to do this thing over the next 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years.
Sure.
That's what the Biden administration is trying to make the argument for. This is a Putin-fueled fuel crisis, and it's connected to, COVID catch-up and supply chain issues. That's what's going on. So we're going to do this temporarily. We're going to open up some reserves. We're going to allow a few drilling contracts to be fulfilled, and we're going to do some with ethanol. But it doesn't mean we're not staying on our same plan. That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people in the United States.
Yeah.
I get that that's their argument. Now, whether that's politically sustainable or not, I don't know. It does remind me, though, that war is horrible all the time.
Yeah.
Every time there's military action somewhere in the world, terrible things happen. And they happen globally, and they happen environmentally, and it just makes things worse. We could at least say every time we're going to engage in war, it's just going to make everything worse. And if it accomplishes some goal of yours, on your balance sheet should be everything else is worse.
Yeah.
Puppies are less cute. Ice cream tastes sour, and the environment has been damaged because you went to war. Because you sent and so all the bragging that the United States is doing, we're going to help I get it. Sure, that's what you have to do in the middle of a terrible action by Putin, and it will make everything worse.
Yeah.
nothing's going to be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a mess. And at least one person ran out of options, ideas. They decided they couldn't live with the status quo any longer. We mentioned this at the top of the hour, but a climate activist, a guy named Wynne Allen Bruce, set himself on fire on the steps of the Supreme Court on Earth Day in an attempt to draw awareness to this climate crisis. And, we were talking before we came on air as people that are kind of in the activist sphere that do public acts of awareness. Man, I don't know what to do with something like this. This is so extreme and so final. And I just don't think it's going to achieve what he hoped it would. But we are talking about it, so I don't know.
Yes, but look, on Earth Day, people were talking about Earth Day, and now, and look, this has been a thing. There were Buddhist monks, I know, in Myanmar and other places where
protesting
for
the Vietnam War,
they do the same thing, right? In recent years, there's a movement of martyrdom in activist movements. I come from the Hebrew tradition picked up by Jesus and then, proclaimed then by Christians that mercy and not sacrifice is the better way to go. So in other words, there's another way of living that doesn't require sacrifice. And to the degree that these are public acts and stunts as opposed to some martyrdom sacrifice, I just think humanity has to be done with the martyrdom narrative and stop justifying the wrongful death of someone as a martyr, whether it was by the hands of an individual, a country, or themselves. I just think now some reason, as you said when we were talking before we came on, that he's been planning this for a while. A community of people was around him. It was a supported action by a group of people. So, look, at the same side, everybody has their own choice to make. The point of someone like what Wynne Allen Bruce did by setting himself afire is to make people talk about it. Mm-hmm. That means that people who have differing opinions are also going to talk about it, right? When you do something this level of extreme of taking a life in order to make a point, whether it's your own life or not, I think doesn't matter. You've taken a life in order to do this, that's designed as a public act. He did it at the United States Supreme Court on public property to draw attention. I've done things in that very same spot. I've been arrested at that very same spot to try to capture people's attention. Mm-hmm. I think there's levels at which you can do some of these things that are appropriate and are not. And I think taking a life for a cause, I can't find a time where I think taking a life for a political or cause, regardless of how severe it is the path that we should choose. Mm-hmm. So I know that's judgy, and I would love to be engaged by someone who has a different view on it. But
yeah,
I'm pretty settled.
Yeah, it's sad. I'm sad for him, his loved ones, and I'm sad that we got to this point where this guy felt like this was the only option.
Yeah,
to draw attention to this. So.
Yeah, and I don't know. It just seems to me we need people to live full, whole lives and not cut them short for any cause.
Yeah. A better world is possible. We're going to have to work real hard to get there.
Is there a more beautiful world your heart knows is possible? It's a great little phrase. Well, Mike and Trisha and Jim and Kent and Dave, thanks. You want to browse through these and see if some of these are still timely to respond to? Hey, Mike writes, hey, y'all, Doug and Dan, would you all agree that it's workers who create value and profits for any company? Workers create the products and the salaries for the management owners? Yeah, most often workers are the most important part of especially in the businesses that need to unionize. That's definitely the case. And that's why unions should exist. And that's why unions are good for business and they're good for companies. Point well made. Trisha says, back in this union thing, wasn't there a bunch of corruptions going on in unions and workers are getting screwed by money laundering and embezzlement? That, and a lot of people left unions because they felt like unions just became political operating systems that spent a lot of money on politics. And there are a lot of people who felt like the union supported politicians that they as an individual didn't support, and they didn't want to see their money going there any longer. It's a big deal. Unions spend an enormous amount of money on our political system. I know that we talk about, people that that are lobbyists. Unions function that way. They put an extreme amount of pressure on politicians and spend a lot of money and do a lot of organizing and turn out a lot of people. So we should also know that in addition to fighting for rights and fighting for pay and fighting for representation, they also tend to do another thing. That's a reason why a lot of people also left unions. So there's a lot that's going on there. So Kent says, you pay attention, pray, write, speak out. The past 2 world wars started in an area with those players. What are you saying about being in a regional skirmish? That's pretty much everyone in the world has been saying the middle 1930s. Look, I think the difference between rhetoric of the 1930s in Nazi Germany and rhetoric now are not comparable. I think that I'm not saying that what's happening in Ukraine via Russia is justifiable because it's not at Germany level. But let's not compare every military action between former Soviet states as the same thing as what Germany was seeking to do in the 1930s and the 1940s. I think it's an inaccurate comparison, and we should not be getting ourselves riled up. We created a series of conditions, including the United Nations and the UN, and NATO, to respond to situations so that would not happen again. The fact that NATO exists will keep the Soviet Union from launching into a world war. That's why it exists. It didn't exist previously. It will prevent that from happening. We should not be resting on, we're not going to have a world war because Vladimir Putin decided to do the right thing. We need to know we're not going to have a world war because the international order will prevent a world war. People talk about this as if, boy, if Vladimir Putin wants a world war, that's what we're going to get. No, we're not. Look, we have not even come close to this putting a squeeze on Russia. Not even close to what would happen if they crossed and attacked a NATO nation. That the level of domestic and financial and military devastation would end this thing immediately. The reason we're not going to have a world war is not because Vladimir Putin has ceased to think it's a good idea. He can want a world war all he wants. He's not going to get one. Because the countries around the world are not going to join him in the world war. And that's what
Yeah, Jim says the fact that 30% of the world's food supply comes from Russia and Ukraine kind of makes this war something that affects the world. Yeah. Food, oil,
global implication and a world war, that's worth making. Jim, great point. And look, Kent, I get your point too. Sorry to be so harsh on it. But the difference between we now have a war that's causing has global implication. Yeah, we should talk about that. By the way, all wars do, and they're all bad for that very same reason. What's happening in Yemen, in Syria, and even parts of Mexico, like these things are destroying what should be alive and well in the world. So. Well, we've really gone on and on today. I know we started a little late, and now I got an 11:30 meeting that I'm going to be late for if I don't hustle out here. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow, Politics Day, here on Tuesday. Thanks, everybody, for all your good comments. Peggy, Mike, Kent, Bonnie, Eva, Jim, all of you. Yeah. And if you're just hearing these rattle off of names and you ever want to watch this, it's really, really quite tantalizing.
Look at our faces and Doug's cool hat.
Hey. And my little camera I put on the side stopped in the middle of things and said, it's overheating. So I don't know. All right.
You're going to spend 2 hours on YouTube figuring that out.
Here we go. There goes my day.